Hey, this is E-Rock with Fanboy Films, and welcome back to the Late Night Saga Reviews. Today I'm going to talk about The Sit-In. This is a documentary that sort of spawned off the last thing I saw, which was the story of Late Night. This one was talking about 1 week when Harry Belafonte guest hosted The Tonight Show for Johnny Carson. Basically, the reason why Johnny gave him that week-long time slot was because I guess Johnny wanted to make a comment about civil rights and things like this that he felt were divisive in society. He didn't want to sort of tarnish his own image as being a down-the-middle kind of guy who didn't get very political, or at least didn't take political sides. And so he brought in somebody else who could, I guess. Harry Belafonte being a musician, a celebrity, and a political activist. I guess my first big thought in hindsight, having seen the whole thing, was that, first of all, this documentary has a very narrow focus as far as it's just centered on, not a talk show that lasted for decades or years or 1 year. They're talking about 1 week, 5 episodes. The Tonight Show was 90 minutes back then, so it would have been 7.5 hours of programming, of which they said only 2 30-minute chunks are still surviving that we can look at. One is an interview he did with Martin Luther King Jr., and the other was with Robert F. Kennedy. And so none of the rest, so really we're not talking about 7.5 hours or 1 week of television. We're talking about 1 hour worth is all they really had to work with. So this documentary kind of expands it in a different way, which I thought was neat. They talk about who Harry Belafonte was. He was always a very inclusive artist. He wasn't just a popular black musician. They kind of made the point that back then there was white music for white people and black music for black people, and he was trying to do black music that would appeal to white people. And he had a white audience, and he tried to always be inclusive and have white people in his bands or his productions or his movies that he was working on. He, I guess, was also a movie star a little before my time, so I don't know a lot of his stuff. I did see White Man's Burden, so.
But in this world, the roles are reversed.
White people are genetically inferior.
So I guess that's the reason why Johnny thought that this would work. He could bring in a black entertainer who could bring a black presentation to his white audience without maybe jarring them too much. And while most of the guests for the week, they talk extensively about the guest lineup he had for the week, and they had a big list, which I guess was published after his week was done. And there's like 40 names on it of the most popular, entertainers. But again, all that footage is lost. So what they kind of do in this special is they go through and they highlight all these, they could talk about Aretha Franklin, and then they show clips from her on other shows at the time, since they don't have the one from The Tonight Show. And then they get into Harry Belafonte's personal life a little bit, and they, I guess since his two most high-profile guests for the week, or the two that are surviving, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, they also do little mini bios of them and what they were doing at the time, and kind of what their lives were that had led up to that time. Of course, Dr. King was assassinated just like a month after this program aired, I guess. So it's interesting that, Belafonte asks him about, does he fear death because of all the toes he's stepping on as a civil rights leader? And he says, well, I don't worry about that. It's kind of some deep stuff. And then Robert Kennedy, it's interesting. They talk about how he was not helpful in the civil rights movement at first, and then they kind of I don't know, Belafonte sort of sounds like he's taking credit, but maybe it's sort of everybody in the black community kind of reached out to him and talked to him and worked with him, and he kind of started to understand what they were talking about with the problem they felt they were having in the United States. So it was interesting how they said he wasn't maybe so much I'm trying to think of the right word, but wasn't so much of a friendly guest, or wasn't so much of a guest that was on the same page as them. It was almost like they were talking to the opposition in a way, but when Harry has him on the show. But how he was, he became friendly. And then they were pressing him on, I guess there was rumors at the time that he was going to run for president, and he kept saying, no, he wasn't. And then he said, I can't remember what he says on this actual show. I think on The Tonight Show, he still says he's not running, but he ends up running. Like he said a week or two after that. So, and then of course he was also killed. So, possibly because he was going to run for president. And then the other interesting thing was that they talk about Johnny coming back in after the week, and I guess he booked Harry back on the show a month after his guest hosting week was over, just to ask him about how it went. And I guess they were talking about how there was a lot of negative letters and a lot of negative feedback from viewers. How dare you, put this political stuff in our late night show right before we go to bed at night. We want comedy. So there was a lot of that, and Johnny kind of, I think, brought him back in to kind of say, hey, it's okay, and you did a good job, And then they also, it was interesting how they talked about how Johnny also had taken, I think it was an episode of his show, unless it was a primetime special, where he actually had a political roundtable to talk about civil rights, which they kind of said that the Harry Belafonte week was like, getting their feet wet to see if people would take it, and then Johnny actually came in himself and did it, at least for an episode. So yeah, in total, very interesting, very informative. One little side note that's just of interest to me, they do talk about how, just as far as putting this special together, as I said, out of the 5 nights of Tonight shows, there was only 2 half hours remaining. Well, there is some other stuff you see in this, and a lot of it is probably photos of the guests on the show. If you don't know, I think back then, and maybe they still do, they would a lot of times have a still photographer on the set to take some pictures as the show went along. And these pictures would be used for magazines or newspapers or anybody who was saying, this big name celebrity is going to be on the show this week. Check it out. It would be in the TV guide or whatever. So some of those like press photos still exist, even if the episodes have been wiped. And the other thing they used a lot in this documentary was audio of those episodes that no longer exist on video or film. Some of them do exist as audio, and they went and interviewed the guy, and they gave his name, which I'm failing to remember right now. I didn't take notes on this one, but I think he's the same guy who runs the archival television audio website, and I saw his company name in the closing credits of this, which is interesting because I've run across this guy. I'm working on my Tom Snyder project, trying to gather all the existing Tom Snyder Tomorrow Show footage that exists. And I found this website where he sells old audio recordings of TV shows. I don't know if they're in the public domain. I don't know if he's allowed to do this, but he does it. And so I've run across him before, and I guess this was the actual guy in this documentary. They went to his house and they showed his archive tape collection, and they talked about how he, for some reason in the 50s, started recording audio from TV shows, and he says he now has a lot of stuff that nobody else has, which is probably true. Even a lot of the networks don't have a lot of their own content, and he's got it. And I don't know if they can strike some sort of deal, or I don't know how he would be allowed to sell it, since it's their copyrighted material. But I do understand that if he has the only physical copy in existence, that it seems like he should be able to make some sort of a deal with these networks to, have them buy out his library or something. But I just thought that was an interesting footnote. I've been using this guy's website for a couple of years, and I think that's the guy. So the Sit-In documentary, Harry Belafonte hosts the Tonight Show. Good documentary. Like I said, tight focus, kind of, but then expanded out to fill, it's like an hour and 15 minutes or something. It's a good show. Check it out. I believe it's on Peacock streaming. And we'll see you next time.